Hello and welcome. My name is Matthew Marquardt, and this is the 9th video in the Beginner's Guide to Construct 3. And in this particular video, we're going to learn to create a shooting mechanic, a bow effect to go along with that mechanic, and destructible walls. Now, one thing to note, this is a complex mechanic that's going to involve quite a few events, and also requires you to have a bow and arrow. So if you don't have a bow and arrow, or you're looking to save events, then I suggest that you watch video 10 instead of this video to figure out the mechanic. But I do want to know also, before moving on, that I do talk about things like destructible walls in this video that I only talk about in this video. So make sure that you watch both videos. Just follow the mechanic in the second version of the shooting in video 10 instead. Now, if you guys don't remember way back in the first video I showed you guys, but this mechanic is right where we shoot and we see that kind of line that goes across the screen, hits the wall, shakes a little bit, and so on. Really cool. It looked like an extra level of polish that I really want to push on you guys as developers, because this is the things that help you stand out, right, as a developer. Helps your game kind of pop from all the other ones. And the particular game developer who created that is the same developer who created all of this content that I've been using. That's his name right there. So I just want to reiterate, it's under the Super Platformer engine, and so this is where I found and learned that mechanic. So I want to give full credit to said developer. I don't want to say his name because I know I'm going to totally say it wrong. But either way, I do, like I said, want to make sure that you guys understand A, where it came from, but B, right, that this particular developer, if you watch all of his other videos, like, he does have that level of polish I'm hoping that you guys have, which is part of the reason I decided to use his assets for this video series. So take that stuff seriously. Think about it whenever you're creating stuff, to go a little bit above and beyond and not go too simple on your effects. All right, now, one last thing to note before we move forward. I'm actually using, as you can see here, the original one, the tutorial here, instead of the other little playground I was creating in the other videos, because I happened to forget to save that, so I lost the work, just the enemy stuff, but I didn't want to have to redo it. So that's why I'm using this now instead of the other scene that you saw me with just in the previous video. All right, so let's move forward from that. So there's three things you need to add, or three, I should say, in this case, sprites you need to add to start this effect. So let's double click here, and we're going to go over and we're going to click on Sprite, Insert, and remember, I'm clicking out here in no man's land to add our content here. I'm going to resize it, and we're going to change it to 1 and 1, both in the height and the pixels, and we're going to zoom in here, grab the paint bucket, make sure we're set to white, and put white in there. Now, the other thing I want to do in this particular case is go back and set the origin point, which, because the image started off big, is out no man's land. And this is important that you actually do this, otherwise it will not work properly. The whole mechanic will not work properly. And I'm actually typing in 1 here, but I want to put 0. So let's do 0 and 0, right? So both in the X and Y will do 0, and we'll shut that off. And we're going to rename this sprite to, come down here, rename. We're going to rename it to bow point. Okay? So there we go, bow point. All right, so the next one, double click, sprite, once again, add it up here. And we're going to find a sprite, in this case, the one that is under the Super Platformer Engine Assets, Objects, Bow, and Bow Line. Hit open. Same thing, let's change the origin point to 0 and 0. Let's shut this off, and let's rename said sprite here to Bow Line. Whoops, there we go. All right, and then lastly, we're going to add the arrow itself. So we'll come over here, sprite, add the arrow, open this up, go back to number 1 here. In the folder, and hit open. It is a let's zoom up here. It is actually an animation. As we can see here, it is a flashed, like, white version of the arrow. And then if I come in import frames and do the second frame, you'll see here that it is the brown kind of, stem of the arrow. So it just flashes for a split second and then stops. So let's go to the animation. Let's just call the animation flash. You don't necessarily have to do this, but we'll do it anyways. And we're going to set the speed to 10, and we're just going to leave everything else default, right? So it just happens real quick, this quick flash, the bow goes in the wall, done, right? So that's really what's going on. And then we're also going to change, once again, the origin point of this one, but this one's going to be a little different. We're going to set the X to 7, and we're going to do the Y to 1. Okay, so there you go. So remember, this is important for all three of these. If you do not set your origin point, things are going to get a little wonky. So if you're noticing that towards the end, that's what you're going to need to fix. All right, so I did skip a couple of things. In this case, let me actually rename this, and we'll rename this one to arrow. But I skipped adding behaviors to all three of them because I just thought I'd do it all at once. So let's start off with the bow point because that was the first one we created. We're going to add and I don't know why I'm double clicking on that. Let's go over here to behaviors. We'll click on behaviors, and we're going to add a behavior, in this case, destroy outside layout. So if it goes outside the layout, it just goes kaput, right? And then let's go to bowline here, and once again, double clicking for some weird reason. Let's go to behaviors instead, add new behavior. We'll click on fade, hit add, and this one, the only difference between the defaults, instead of 1 second, we're going to do 0.1 second, right? As we can see over here, and everything else we're going to leave the same. And then arrow, right? We want to make sure, and notice I finally didn't double click on that, but here we go. On the arrow, the last one, we're going to add a sign, and you might recognize this from our moving platform, but this is that effect that the arrow kind of, bounces in the wall or whatever, rotates in the wall. That's what this is going on. So instead of horizontal, we're going to change this all the way down to angle, and then the other settings, as we can see here, right, we'll set the period to 0.2 and the magnitude to 20, and once again, everything else will remain the same. So those are the three things that we needed to create, right? So we went in, animated it, put the origin points where they needed to, and so on. Okay, and we once again do want to leave them in the scene, and we also want to leave them out of the scene, right? So I should say we do want to leave them in the layout, but not visible from at any point by the player themselves. Okay, so we're just going to leave them up there. All right, so the next thing we want to do, I'm going to scroll down here. So there's a couple of extra things we have to create before we get into this, literally this massive event sheet. So let's hit these last things up and move on. So let's scroll down to the player. We'll double click on the player and load them up. And what we want to do is go to the shoot animation. Okay, so we're clicking on shoot, and we're going to add a new origin point. So we need to keep the original one, and we're going to add a new one. So let's right click in here, add a new point. We're going to call this one, let's rename this one arrow. Okay, and this is where the arrow is going to shoot from. And so I have it set to 15 and 11. So anywhere, just somewhere in front of the character. As you can see as I do the animation, right, it disappears. So we want to make sure that we right click and then do the whole animation. We don't need to do all animations, just this one. So apply the whole animation, and now you'll see it in all the animations, right? So that point is there through all of them. All right, awesome. So once that's done, we need to add a mouse input to the scene. So remember, we had a keyboard input, right, so that we can hit left and right and do things. Well, same thing. Now we need a mouse because we're going to use the left click on a mouse to shoot. So let's double click and add that. So let's scroll down here to where it says input and just add a mouse. We don't need to do anything else. The rest of that is going to be down here. So we've added that. And then lastly, let's add our destructible wall. And so that is also a sprite. So we'll double click in here. Go to Sprite, we'll add it up here, open this up, and I'm going to go from objects here to blocks instead, and weak blocks. And I'm going to choose weak 1 PNG and hit open, and it looks something like this, right? It looks a little bit better if we take that off. Okay, so you can rotate it and move it any way you want. So there we go. So that's how we're gonna create that. But we do need to add the behaviors, or part of the behaviors, are going to make it work. So first, of course, we'll go over here to behaviors and make it a solid, so the player can't run through it. Hence, a destructible wall will prevent them from moving forward, but they can shoot it a couple times and break it. And just like the enemy, right? We had an instance variable on the enemy. Let's do this same thing. Add an instance variable. We're going to call it hit points. So we're gonna say consistent, right, with what the enemy's thing was. So we'll call it hit points. We're going to leave it number. I'm going to set the initial value to 2 because each arrow shot in my game will count as 1. This will be 2 hits. It will destroy it. You, of course, can choose any number you want based on both how much damage the arrow does and how many times you want to hit the object before it's destroyed. All right. So that's it, right? So now we can go in and do it. Now we don't need this in the scene anymore. This one can be deleted. And then we just want to make sure that we rename it. So down here for Sprite, I want to rename it right here, Destructible Walls. So instead of trying to type that up, I'm just going to copy and paste, right? Rename, Control V, done. All right, there you go. So there's our Destructible Walls object. And funny enough, I have those there. I'm going to delete these previous ones. This is from the previous video where I forgot to delete it. All right, so yes, now we have to do this, and this is a lot of work, so follow along carefully. There's a lot of places you can mess up, so you want to go and make sure you go back and double check everything if something's not working. But as you can see here, quite a bit of content, so let's go through this. So let's hit up the event sheet now, and once again, if you're trying to save on events, don't add a group and call it shooting and put all the stuff underneath it. Just keep adding events here. Otherwise, like I said, for organizational purposes, if you don't care about saving events, then make another group, call it shooting, and put this in. But here we go. So first things first, we need to get the mouse to click to actually create, right, the set effect that we want. So let's add the mouse right here, and we'll do on click, and you can choose, right, you can choose any click you want. In this case, we're leaving it left, and we're also leaving it clicked, but you can do a double clicked if you ever wanted something like that, but we won't. We're just going to hit done with that. So basically in this case, right, mouse on left click, but we also want to do a couple of kind of sub events here. So we're going to add right click, and we're going to add a sub event. And the first sub event, and both these are involving the player, so we're going to grab player, and what we're going to do is we're going to type in wall here, right? So the reason is basically saying when the player's by a wall, we're going to invert it, but we're going to do when the player's by a wall, and we're going to do both a left and a right. So we're going to hit done on that, and then I'm going to right click on this, and we're going to add another condition, right? So on the same layer there, and we'll do player, and we'll type in wall again, and this time we'll do the same thing, but right wall instead, and hit done. All right, and the reason why you want to do it another condition so that they're the same. You'll notice that these are together. If you don't do another condition, say you do another sub-event, they won't be the same. So make sure it's another condition. So both of these have to be the case. Now, they do need to be inverted, so that's easy. If we right-click, invert, and invert here, right, basically what we're saying is if we click on the mouse button and the player is not right next to a wall to his left or to his right, do these actions, right? So this will prevent the bow effect to happen if you're right on top of a wall, because it'll be a little weird if the bow effect happens when you're right on top of a wall and the arrow is just kind of bouncing in the wall, like inside the character, just odd. So that's why this is here. Otherwise, you wouldn't need these. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add actions to the lower part here. And the first one is we'll go grab the player again, and this time we're going to make it so that they play an animation, right? So set the animation. Once again, if I click left, set the animation to be shoot, which is our shoot animation that we did way back in the character video, right? And hit done. And then we're going to want to make sure that we prevent, in this case, the player movement group from working. So what does that mean? Well, we're going to come over here, start typing in group. We'll do set active or set group active. In here, in the quotations, we're going to type in player movement, okay, and we're going to set it to deactivated. Okay, now if you're wondering what this is, if we go back, remember in the beginning I told you, you can create groups and you can, organize things this way. Well, I told you the only group you had to create was player movement, and this is why. If you come down here, this basically says tell all player movement things to be deactivated the moment I'm clicking left on the mouse. Why? Because these things will supersede your shooting animation. So if I'm trying to shoot and I'm jumping, I can't. This, if we kind of like this, because we know we have the animation set to jump and we're jumping and all that other stuff, we're basically turning all this off momentarily so that when the player is shooting, they can shoot, keep shooting one direction or jump and shoot and things like that, right, which you wouldn't be able to do. So that's why that exists. Okay, so the next part of this, and I'm actually going to skip this part just a second and then hit up this one. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add player, and I'm doing this because it just makes more logical sense in my mind, but we're going to grab the player here, and in this case we're going to go on animation is finished, right? So when finished, so we'll go on finished, right? So this basically means any animation. So when an animation is finished, we'll double click here, and what animation is being finished? Shoot, right? So we'll hit done. Okay, so when that animation is finished, well, we need to revert this back. So that's why I said logically I'm doing this one next, even though I have it over here differently, because, yeah, we're doing this to where we deactivate player movement, but we got to make sure we turn it back on. Otherwise, he'll be stuck in the shooting pose forever. So we'll hit add action, and we're going to do system, and once again, we'll start typing in group here, and we'll do set group active. This time we will leave it active, and we'll type in player movement again in the quotations. All right, so there you go, player movement. All right, cool. So that should, like I said, revert this back after you're done shooting. Now, we got to add this little tiny section right in the middle. So this is basically saying when the arrow spawns, because keep in mind that the player, in this case, his animation pulls the bow back and then shoots. It'd be weird if the arrow's coming out right when he's pulling his arrow back. So this is basically helping that happen. So let's go in, we'll do that. We'll add a new event. We'll go to player. Okay, and on this one, while shoot is playing. So in this case, we'll choose while an animation is playing, and we'll put in shoot. All right, and hit done. And as far as this part works, what we need to do is we need to do another 2 sub-events here. So we'll do a sub-event, and in this particular case, we're going to choose an animation frame. So let's grab the player, compare frame. So which frame do we want? Well, we want frame 2, which is technically the third, because remember, it's frame 0, 1, 2. Right, so we'll do frame 2. Hit done, right, and then once again right click, add, and then do another condition, right, on this so that they're paired together as opposed to separate. And we'll do trigger, and we will type in once, right? So let's type in the whole word once, and trigger once while true, and that's what we're going to do right here. Okay, so there's your sub conditions and now, or sub events, and what we'll do is we'll make it so that the player will now spawn these two things. So this is where he's going to spawn the bow point and the bow line during the second frame. So that's where it comes out, the arrow shoots out. All right, so let's do that. Player, right, and we will start typing in create or spawn another object, doesn't matter, still looks it up. We'll come grab which object do we want. Well, let's do bow point first, and we'll just leave this at layer 0, but remember we put in that that arrow, the image point arrow, so let's do that. Let's put in quotations arrow. Okay, and now it's going to look at the arrow origin point of the player and use that instead, and then hit done. And we're going to also add another action where we add the player, and once again we'll spawn, right? So let's see, where's our spawn another object, this case line, so we'll do bow line, and then same thing, quotations arrow, done. All right, cool. So now all that's finished. Now what we got to do is start creating some of these other effects. Like this particular effect is pretty long, but this effect is when the bow line shoots across the screen, and it is as long as basically the width is as long as the character to whatever it's hitting, whatever wall it's hitting or enemy it's hitting. So that's how it creates that effect, is through this entire set of events. So let's do that. So let's go add event. We're going to do a system event. We're going to do a while. Okay, so let's type in while. All right, so while, and we're going to add a whole ton of extra conditions here. So we're going to add another condition. Whoops, right here, another condition. And we're going to add while bow point, right, is overlapping. So you can see right here is overlapping another object. We can choose what object, and there's a bunch of things. So things like the tile map, right? So the tile map is, you know, like we mentioned in the second video or third video, that is the ground, right? And the walls and stuff. So we're basically going to have it while it's not overlapping. So we'll invert it, right? So while it's not overlapping that, let me see if I can get this to kind of pop out a little bit more. There you go. Looks a little better. Pull this one out and this so you guys can see a little better. All right, cool. So while it's not overlapping with tile map, we're also going to add another, right, condition. And in this case, same thing. Well, it's not overlapping with the enemy. So let's do that. It's not overlapping. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. I did the enemy first. We don't want that. Let's try it again. Right. Add another condition. We'll do player is overlapping, and we'll choose the enemy, right? Patrol enemy, and hit done. Right click, invert it, and then lastly we'll do it again. Oops, I totally not thinking here. I'm not doing player, I'm doing bow point. Sorry. So let's try that again. So we'll just add another condition. Let's see if we can finally get this right. We'll do bow point is overlapping another object, and third try is the charm, right? There we go. Patrol enemy, good, and then invert that. All right, cool. And then two more. In this case, let's do another one here, add another condition, and we'll do bow point. And this time we're going to do destructible walls, so it's overlapping another object, choose destructible walls, and then hit done and invert. And then we also want to do it so that when it's not outside the layout either. So let's right click, add another condition, and we will do bow point again. And in this case, outside layout. Okay, so we can just start typing in layout is outside layout, and then right click to invert it. There you go. All right, so those are all of the not sub conditions, but just extra conditions. Now we do want to do a sub event. So this is getting fairly complex, but we're going to do a sub event here. We're going to do sub event, and we're going to choose when player is mirrored, right? So we can start typing in mirrored, right? And we'll choose that, right? So when the player is mirrored, and then another sub event. So right click, add, and do another sub event, and then this time we're going to do system else. Okay, so we'll choose, where are we, else. Start typing in else, there it is. Okay, so it's basically saying, you know, when all this stuff is happening, right, if the player's mirrored, do this, otherwise do this. So let's do that. So we'll do, in this case, player, and we're going to go bow point. Okay, so for our action here, we want to move forward. So we're going to start typing in move, right? And you'll see move forward. Okay, and so now what do we want to do to type in the move forward? To be honest with you, I'm going to be a little lazy here. I'm actually going to go over to my layout and type all that in from here. I'll scroll down to where I have it right here. right? And actually go up a little bit. Where are you? Right here. Okay, so we'll double click on this and I will copy this entire line. Okay, and as you can see here, this is what we're going to type in for the first one, for the is mirrored. It's going to be distance, parentheses, self.x, comma, self.y, comma, bow point.x, comma, bow point.y, comma. Okay, and then you have the asterisk -1. So this is the distance that we're going to move it. So this basically, this is what's controlling the width, right? In this particular case. So I'm going to copy this, and that's actually on bow line, sorry. In this one, we're just going to have it move 1 pixel, but I'm just copying this anyways. Whoops, let me actually copy it. I just selected it. Copy it, and then we're going to switch back over here. So remember, on this one, actually, I'm just going to do -1 on this and hit done. But now I'm going to add a new action, and instead of bow point, we're going to do bow line, and this is where I copy that. So I got just a little bit ahead of myself here, but regardless, we'll go bow line. And so in this case, we'll set the bow line width, right? So start typing in set width, and we'll choose that. So here's our set width, and that's where I control V this in, right? So all that stuff I just talked about, we're going to put it in that one. So we're setting the width of the bow line, not the bow point, okay? And then we'll hit done. All right, so now we're basically going to do the same thing, right, but kind of, you know, inverted. So instead of being -1 pixels, we're going to move forward a pixel. So with the else, we're going to do, once again, bow point. We're going to type in move forward, right? We'll choose that. We'll just leave it the default one, hit done. And then we'll add bow line. And then we'll do, in this case, set width, right? Double click on that, and we're going to add that same line of code we just had, but without all that stuff at the end, right? Without the asterisk, you know, -1, right? So we're just going to have it just with the parentheses ending it, and then hit done. So there you go. So that is this fairly complex set of actions, but once again, this is what creates that effect that the bow line will go the length that it needs to, depending on the face, the direction the player is facing. All right. Now, this next one here is basically the movement of the bow point. It's like, so or I shouldn't say the movement, the moment the bow point like hits the collision, the arrow object is going to spawn, and that's what is happening here. So let's do that. So let's hit add, and we're going to do bow point, right? And we're going to go is overlapping. So we'll choose is overlapping another object, and we're going to choose tile map. So come down here and choose tile map, and then hit done. Now this is going to be an or one, so everything is this or this or this or so on. Not everything, but or. So in order to do that, we're going to right click on the object, or right click over here in the beginning of it, and we're going to make it an or block, right? So everything from here on out will be an or. Okay, so we'll right click, and then we'll add another condition, and we'll set this one to be is overlapping, right? So bow point is overlapping patrol enemy. Right, so we'll choose patrol enemy and hit done. So you'll see that it has that or in there, and then we'll do it again, add, and then add another condition, and we'll choose bow point one more time, and then we'll do is overlapping, choose, and just whoops, too far down, destructible walls, and hit done there. Okay, so it's either the tile map, the enemy, or the destructible wall that it's overlapping. And now what do we want to do? Well, let's do a sub event. So what we're going to do is, if it's doing one of those things, now we're going to do a sub event where we're going to trigger once. So we'll do a system one again, and we'll start typing in trigger once while true. So we'll select that. Okay. So let me scroll down here as not to confuse myself, but we're right here. Okay. And so now we're going to do a sub event of this one. So let's add a sub event of triggering once while true. So when the player is mirrored, so we'll do player, right? And we'll type in mirrored, right? So when the player is mirrored, so basically the same thing we did before, right? But for something different in this case, for the arrow to be spawned. And then we're going to right click again up here and add another sub event. And then this one will be the system else, right? So he's either mirrored or he's not mirrored. And if he's not mirrored, then do this, right? That's all it's saying. So let's start typing in else. There you go. All right, cool. So all that stuff's there. Now we got to add all the content that goes with it. So under the system section, we're going to add the bow point. So come up here, we'll add action, and we're going to do bow point. Okay, so we're going to spawn from the bow point, right? So let's just start typing in spawn another object. What object? We want to do the arrow, and we'll just leave 0 and 0 for both of these, and we'll be fine. And then we want to add another action to this one, which is bow point be destroyed. So we're going to make the bow point disappear instead of having this little white dot there forever, which would be a little weird. So we'll type in destroy here. Boom. There you go. Okay, so it's going to spawn the arrow and destroy the bow point. And then what we're going to have do here is we're going to have the arrow get mirrored or not mirrored, right, depending on the direction of the character. So that's what this second part is. So if the player is mirrored, let's add our action. We'll have the arrow, and we will set it mirrored. So let's just type it in mirrored, set mirrored, leave it mirrored, hit done. And then with the else, we'll also do arrow, but this time set not mirrored. So we'll do arrow, once again, set mirrored. Click on that, change it to not mirrored, and done. All right, awesome. So we're getting down, we're getting down the bottom here. These last few sections, so this one right here is basically the effect where the arrow kind of wiggles in the wall there when after it gets shot and then stops. So let's do that next. So we'll add event, we'll choose arrow, and so we'll do on created. So I'll just start typing in on created. Okay, so once it's created, this is what we want to do. We want to go into the system, and we're going to wait 0.4 seconds. So let's do wait. And remember, you got to type in a 0 here. So 0.4, and then hit done, right? So it's going to wait almost a half a second. And then we're going to have it with the arrow here, set the sign. So actually, if I scroll down, you'll even see it here. So you can set. So notice, because we have the sign behavior on it, now I have these new things I can add. So that's another thing I love about Construct, is that it's context sensitive. It won't give you stuff that you can't actually use. So we're going to do set active here. And we're going to set it to inactive. So basically, after 0.4 seconds, make it stop wiggling. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have the arrow set angle. So let's type in set angle. And the reason we want this is because it would just stop it at any particular angle. It wouldn't make any sense. We want to stop it at 0, so it's always straight out of the wall. Otherwise, it'll look a little silly if it's angled up when the player didn't even shoot it from that angle. Right? So that's what we're going to do. Set angle to 0 degrees, and done. So then the next one here, basically these next two are the same thing, but just one's for enemies and one is for the destructible walls. Okay, and so how does this work? Well, this is what's happening here. This basically means that when a enemy is hit by an arrow, you're going to destroy the arrow. Otherwise, the arrow's just going to sit there, right? So if I was actually to hit play now, so let's just do that to double check, right? So now we should have most of the things working, right? I shoot, it goes in the wall, it stops, cool. But if I shoot an enemy, see that? It's kind of silly. It's just stuck there in the middle of the air, right? And I can shoot the enemy infinitely and he won't die. Right, and these things will just sit there forever. So that's obviously, this is where this last section comes in. That's so that we can, basically take hit points away from the enemy and then destroy the arrow so it isn't just floating there in space. So let's do that. So let's start off by doing the enemy one. So we're going to add the enemy here, and we'll choose patrol enemy. So on collision with. So on collision with what object? Arrow, obviously. So we'll choose arrow or whatever, of course, your thing is going to be. And we're going to hit done. Okay, and we're going to add another condition. So let's add another condition. And then we're going to add, in this case, arrow, okay, in this case, is active. All right, so basically meaning when the patrol enemy is hit by the arrow and sign is active on arrow, right, this is what's going to happen. All right, well, a whole slew of things. So let's start by doing that. So first, let's destroy the arrow. So arrow, type in destroy. Here we go. Okay, now we're going to create a couple of objects. So remember that that kind of hit effect that I had you guys create, that particle system, that when the player gets hit, we're just going to throw the same one on. I guess if you really wanted to, you can put a different one on the enemy, but we're just going to use this one. So we'll hit add, and we're going to go to system, and we're going to create. So let's type in create, and we'll go create object. And which object do we want to create? Well, we want to create the hit points. So we'll hit. And then all of this stuff. So so on the layer, right, we're going to leave it 0, which is, the game layer. But the X and the Y are going to have to be set to the enemy's position. So we'll have to type in patrol, right, enemy. So we want the patrol's enemy position. So this is the enemy getting hit. So we want it to show up at his position, right? And Y there. So X and Y for both of those, and then hit done. Okay. Now this is the only difference. There's three things we're going to do here. This is going to be the only difference between this and the destructible wall, is we want the enemy to pause for a second, right? Like he gets hit and he just has this quick little pause, right? So if I go back to the initial one here and I hit play, you'll see if I hit the enemy, it has this really quick pause, like oop, Boom. Just I mean, really slow. You can slow it down more if you want, but it's just otherwise he just keeps walking straight through. Really, all I'm slowing him down is for 0.1 seconds. So if you didn't notice it, that's why. If you want to make it longer, then go ahead. But that's really all that's happening here. So we're going to add this action where we're going to do another set action here, and we're going to do a time scale. So let's start typing in time. And so we're going to set time scale. So we're going to choose set time scale, and we're going to do 0. So basically what that means is he's stopped. He's not moving at all, right? Remember up here it says 1 is normal speed, 0.5 is half speed, 2 is double speed, so on. 0 is paused. So we're going to have him stop for a really split second. Then what we're going to do is we're going to wait. So we'll do a system and wait. So remember, this is where you'll set it for longer. So if you say 0.1 is, we want to slow him down a little bit more, then maybe we'll do 0.2, right, or 2.5, or whatever you want, right? So we'll just do 2 in this case. I have 1 in there, but same difference, right? You set that number, and then we're going to set it active again, right? So let's set this time scale active again. So go in here, system, time scale, right? Set time scale, and active just means 1. So we'll set it back to 1, and then we're going to subtract. So let's go to patrol enemy here. So we'll go to the enemy, look at his variable there. So let's start typing in subtract here. So subtract from our instance variable. Which one? Well, hit points. He has a patrol, but that one was just to have him go which direction. So hit points, how much? Well, how much damage do we want the arrow to do to an enemy? In this case, just 1 damage, so we'll leave it 1. And there you go. So now I should be able to destroy the enemies, right? So between that, now it looks like real quick. Yes, I did forget to do one, so I did skip. You might have noticed me skipping it, so but obviously I guess we can do it in any order. I was talking about, well, then it should destroy them. Well, no, we didn't do any code to destroy the enemy, so here's the code up here. So let's do that secondly. So we'll come back and we will do patrol enemy, right? And so when their hit points are, so in this case, instance variables again, compare instance variable, hit points when it is equal to, right, 0. Now keep in mind that if your weapon does more damage than 1, and it can go like into a negative value, equal to won't cut it, right? So you can do less than if it was always hit, but I'm just doing equal because it has to go to 0. So we'll have it when he gets to 0 and has no more health. What happens to the enemy? Well, clearly in this case we're going to destroy him, right? So patrol enemy, and we'll type in destroy. There we go. And so enemy is destroyed. And then what do we want to do? Well, let's do that little dust effect. So once again, we're kind of saving. We don't have to, do something twice. We're going to add that little dust effect spawn when he dies. So we'll do system, create object, right? So we'll come in here, create object. And what do we want to create? The dust, the same dust the player uses when he lands. Layer 0 is fine. Where do we want it? Well, I still have patrol enemy X in there, so we'll just paste that in. There you go, and then hit done. And now we should be able to have everything working except for the destructible walls. Shoot the guy, he stops. Oops, I got a little pause there, so let's shut that off. Okay, so I got to figure out what's going on with that before we move forward, but let's finish off the rest of this just in case. Had a little bug, but that's what happened, so we just shut it off, and we'll try it again after we finish the wall, get the rest of the code in. Now we basically want to copy all of this stuff again, but change it to be the destructible wall instead. Right, so what are we going to do? Well, we could theoretically here copy this whole thing and then paste it in, right? And instead of being a patrol enemy, right, and we can go back and go all the way back to the beginning, we're going to choose destructible wall instead. So we'll do destructible wall, in this case, right, on collision with arrow, right? It should stay the same, then hit done. So now it's destructible wall instead. So remember, these are all the same things. We don't need this time scale stuff. So we'll delete the time scale, set to 0. Time scale or the wait 2.2 seconds, and then set back to 1 because we don't need those. And then we'll have, instead of patrol enemy, subtract hit points. Let's go back, and then we'll choose tile map, and then next, and in this case, whoops, let's go back, subtract from. And actually, did I do hit points on? Oh no, it's still enemy for some weird reason. Let's just delete it completely there, and then we'll try this again. Okay, so destructible wall, where are you? Right up here. So destructible wall, subtract from variable here, hit points. There we go. For whatever weird reason it wasn't working. But we can just redo that one. Great. Same thing. We can change this from the X and Y of enemy to destructible walls. And actually, let me just rename this, or not rename it, but just copy the name of it. So let's make it a little bit easier here, and we'll try this again. So instead of the enemy, X and Y, we'll do destructible walls, X and Y. Right, paste that in, saving us a little time here. There you go. So it's going to be the same. The rest of this stuff should remain the same. And then we can do the same thing again with the hit points one. Control C, Control V, paste that in, but set this to be, once again, back, and then we'll choose the, where are you, destructible wall. Okay, right, and so destructible wall, next, and hit points when equals 0, done. Destroy destructible wall, not enemy. So let's go back, and we'll do, once again, destructible wall. And next should be on destroy. So destroy that, and then add the dust layer. Once again, dust layer, not enemy X and Y, but destructible Y. Whoopsie, that's too much. Let me cancel that. I copied this whole thing and it pasted that in there. So let's fix that. I'll come back into this one here, and I'll copy this. And we'll paste it in there so we don't make that same mistake. And there we go. So we should be good at this point. And I can even dump in a destructible wall to show you how that works. So we'll hit done. So let's do that in our layout here. Let me put a destructible wall in. Okay, you can rotate it, make it bigger if you need to, whatever, put it in the way. Obviously, you can put it like, excuse me, down here, which I do have, I did have a destructible wall down here before just to block that path, but you know, you can do that. And then if I was to say hit play, okay, oops, guess what? It's on the wrong layer. So let's go to layers. Let's go, actually not, let's go to layers. On the destructible wall object, come over here and change it from UI to game, and then hit play. There we go. So the player can run into it, and they can interact with it, right? And then if they want to break it, they can shoot it a couple times and it blows up. And I keep getting this issue with the enemy, so let's see if we can figure that one out. That one probably has to do with the whole waiting thing. So let's go back, and I had changed it to 0.2. Maybe, just maybe, we'll just go back to 0.1 just to make sure that that's not what's freaking it out here. So our time scale set to 0. Oh, hello. See, okay. So basically what's happening here is I'm setting the time scale of the entire universe to 0. So you can clearly see right here that mine is set the time scale of the enemy to 0, and then the enemy back to 1, and there's my mistake. So don't make that same mistake. So instead of doing set time scale just as a universal thing, we need to set the time scale of an enemy. Okay, so set object time scale, not set time scale. Okay, so huge mistake. So it's a good thing I caught that. All right, so we'll come down in here and we'll do the platformer enemy, right, time scale. And in this case, this is the first one. So we're going to set this one to 0, hit done. And then we're going to do this again, back, and we're going to find the set time scale for the object, choose the enemy, and set it, and just leave the default back to 1. Awesome. Now it should work. All right, a little live troubleshooting here. Boom, boom, boom. See how he pauses a lot longer now? So that's at 0.2 seconds. It's up to you if you want to do it. That's why I put 0.1, because 0.2 just felt just a little too long. But there you go. So there's the mechanics. So I know the video was kind of long, a lot of content we had to cover. But if you're having any issues, obviously, you can always ask questions in the forum below or the comments below. Or just rewatch the video to make sure. But you can see even now, I mean, how many times I do it. You know, you're going to make mistakes, going to troubleshoot. So hopefully that helps you out a little bit. And I'll see you guys in the next video.